Hey guys, so now we're on to part four of our seminar on energy systems. And this is where we're going to get into program design specifics. I'm going to talk about how we might design a workout to target a certain energy system, one that we as an athlete or in our role as an athlete use. And going into this, obviously, is going to help if you've done the energy systems modules prior to this one, recognizing the system at work, uh, not too necessary that you've done number two, but if you are into the science behind it, you'll want to take a look at number two at least, understanding what's happening at the substrate level. Learning how to fuel is after that, and I think that's pretty crucial for designing the workout because trying to design a successful workout is pretty pointless if you don't know how to fuel for it, and I think that's common sense. So making sure you've done at least numbers one and three before going on to understand how to design your own sessions that target specific systems. So when we consider this and we start working on making our own programming, we want to kind of do this in order, right? We want to recognize what our priorities are um, as an athlete and what our priorities are with respect to our role and as far as energy systems are concerned, that really goes into what are we going to put above all else. So many of you will be involved in sports that involve different systems at work when you are performing, when you're training and competing. I think prioritization really involves deciding where you need to put in the most work, and that might involve comparing yourself to your competition, to your peers, and kind of giving yourself a bit of a rating. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then it's all about implementing what you're doing. How do we put those priorities into an actual workout? And how do we design a workout that's going to actually target those priorities? And then when I talk about validation, I'm really talking about testing, retesting, and using certain metrics in programming to kind of prove to ourselves that what we're doing is actually working on what we want to be working on. So this is actually the fun part. This is what I would consider the fun part. That's probably why I do what I do. Um, if you've done all three modules, or at least modules one and three, you're definitely in a situation now where you are well suited to start kind of dissecting your role, your sport specific role, and the position, if that's applicable, and now determine what is the most relevant energy system, or what systems perhaps are involved in your role. So what are they? And this is kind of the way we break it down. Okay, so we look at the sport, we look at the position, and maybe even the sport specific roles, jobs, and muscle actions that are involved in those roles. And basically, what I'm asking you now is, can you fill in this chart, right? So we'll do it exemplary. We'll pick this kind of position in basketball, and we'll look at these sport specific roles, the jobs and the muscle actions, and then we'll isolate, the job or the muscle action, and or in some cases both, with what primary energy systems are at work. So if we talk about the first line there, we talk about the fast break. What does that involve? It involves sprinting and running. That's definitely our phosphagen system and our fast glycolytic pathway. Go a little further down. Let's talk about defending and multi-directional running, things like defensive slides and continuous movement at a fairly moderate intensity. We're going to talk about the fast glycolytic pathway and slow glycolytic pathway there. And at the very bottom line, one of the jobs in this role, let's not forget about it, it's intermittent recovery. And it's how well you can recover. And whether that involves recovering just when you're not possessing the ball, or whether you're recovering between play action, that's the oxidative system. And if the oxidative system is at work and it's very efficient, we can recover faster, and we can give those phosphagen and fast glycolytic pathways a chance to rest and kind of top back up before we have to tax them again. And I picked this example because it's a pretty good one with respect to why an athlete has to kind of consider all systems. So it's not enough to just say, what energy systems do I use? Because oftentimes an athlete's going to say, well, I use every system. I use every energy system. So that just kind of doesn't really give me any direction with respect to programming. What we have to do after that is we have to prioritize them. We have to say, well, where do I need the most work? And compared to my peers, compared to the people that I'm up against, I'm pretty good with my oxidative system efficiency. I think I rank pretty high, but maybe compared to those same peers, I don't necessarily rank that high with my phosphagen, with my explosive system, or with my fast glycolytic pathway. I build up oxygen debt fairly quickly. I don't have that anaerobic ceiling that some of my peers tend to have, and that is what's going to point us in the right direction with where we should spend our time and energy when we're designing these types of workouts for ourselves. So, not unlike a majority of athletes, that example shows that we need to train in all systems. I think there are very few athletes who are going to say, "Yeah, I don't really ever need to train in one system." We might say we spend a majority of time or more time or prioritizing in one system, but we definitely very few people that are going to say they train in only two or three systems. They don't train in all four, right? So let's have a look here. Like let's talk about prioritizing, and is there already a heavy focus on an energy system or systems when we do sport specific practice? And this might actually vary by who your coach is, right? Or seasonal changes when we talk about things like periodization and how we shift our focus and what we're really focusing on during practice over the course of a season. And if a coach really wants to focus on things like conditioning and aerobic and anaerobic capacities in an off season or an early season, we might have a little bit more of that in practice. It might be a little less necessary to have it happening outside of sport specific practice. So the last example that we give here, when we talk about how things vary from player to player, right? We could say it varies by coaching style, varies by seasonal challenge, but it also might vary by player. And that would be based on current levels of fitness. And that final example is very common. So this is when we're talking about the players who would struggle to keep up with their teammates or to keep up with their competitors who are playing the same position to them on the other side of the floor. And they struggle. They struggle at the start of a season because they're frequently relying on an anaerobic system when their opponents or their peers are managing to do the same amount of work while staying aerobic. They're still fairly comfortable. They haven't gone into the anaerobic system yet. They're not building up that oxygen debt at the same rate. As a result, they're doing the same amount of work and they're spending less energy to do that same amount of work. Inevitably, they are delaying the onset of fatigue because they are more fit. And that's really what it comes down to, right? It's kind of a common sense thing at the end of the day. So let's rate our current levels of fitness in each system. And if I rank in the 90th percentile in things like vertical jump testing, but I only rank in the 25th percentile in a test like the beep test or the 12-minute run, where's my training priority? And if we go back and we look at how all of these systems are involved here, where is this athlete's training priority? Right? It's the oxidative system and it's the slow glycolytic pathway. It's not the phosphagen system and the fast glycolytic pathway, right? This is where their priorities lie. Okay, so if we talk about where they rank and how well they do, right, we have to look at what's most important for this particular athlete. All right, and this is when we're talking about variable by player. And it doesn't really make sense then for every single player on the team to be prioritizing the same energy systems in their non-sport specific workouts if they order this list differently. All right, so for this particular player, it makes most sense for them to spend more time working in the oxidative and the slow glycolytic pathway when they get a chance off the basketball court, outside of a sport-specific practice. So now it's time to kind of implement some of those priorities. And we're building these workouts now with those priorities in mind, okay? So we're talking about, okay, let's design a training session. And now can we fill this chart out? Can we do implementation here? Can we look at what we learned about our energy systems earlier? And can we say, okay, what we know about the continuous duration tolerance of each system and what we know about the intensity of each system, can we fill this out? Can we say, okay, what's the target of the training session? How long is the training session going to last? What exercise or drills are we doing? And now we're looking at set, repetition, perceived exertion. Remember that RPE percentage, the percentage of my perceived effort. All right, so 100 being a maximal effort, right? And how much rest in between, okay? So use this chart, use it as a cheat sheet, just like you would your other charts, right? Let's prioritize those two systems at the bottom for this particular athletic example. Remember the aerobic glycolytic pathway, that's slow glycolysis, and the oxidative system. And let's look at the intensity and the continuous duration tolerance of those two systems. Let's not differentiate when we're designing the work. Let's talk about how we should design drills that involve moderate intensity efforts lasting from 40 seconds to 2 minutes to target that slow glycolytic pathway, or low to moderate intensity efforts that are continuous, lasting longer than 2 minutes to work on that oxidative system. And so here's a pretty decent version of one filled out, right? We've got 400-meter run intervals working on the aerobic capacity, 6 sets of 1 rep, somewhere around 80 to 85% of maximal intensity, and maybe a 90-second rest in between. And then we have 1,000-meter run intervals working on aerobic endurance, 3 sets of 1 rep, working around 75 to 80% of the RPE, and only a 60-second rest in between. Of course, that's with a warm up and warm down approximately. And the intensity range over the course of the whole workout, ranging between 75 and 85%. This is going to target effectively the aerobic energy systems, aerobic endurance, and aerobic capacity. So have a good look at this. Think about how you might fill it out on the other side of the spectrum if maybe those other systems were your priorities, right? But let's remember that these metrics here, set, repetition, perceived exertion, and rest, are extremely important, and we're going to fill them in using the information on those cheat sheets that you've seen earlier, right, in program design. If you haven't watched any of the program design modules, go back and watch those program design modules. They have the cheat sheets in them, or at the very least, that rainbow colored cheat sheet that we just kind of looked at that talks about duration and intensity of the system, this one right here. So let's just for fun have a look at something like this. What if this was the priority? Okay, what if an athlete decided that it was the complete opposite side of the energy system spectrum that was the priority? It was working on that high speed, maximal explosive work. How are they going to fill this in? Once again, they're going to zoom in on the intensity and the continuous duration tolerance of that system, and they're going to design a workout of exercises or drills with that in mind, okay? So we've got squat jumps, single leg bounding drills, 60-meter resisted sprints, and 40-meter maximal sprints non-resisted. Again, 6 sets, 4 reps, 6 sets, 3 reps for the squat jump and the single leg bounds. 6 sets of 1 rep for the resisted sprint and 6 sets of 1 rep for the non-resisted sprint. But look at the RPE, 100% every time. And the rest, despite the fact that each set would be over fairly quickly, still upwards of 90 seconds, a minute and a half, or in some cases 2 full minutes, because we're taxing that system. We need a full recovery, or at least as much as close to a full recovery as we can get. That's pretty important. So don't forget, these metrics need to change as close to 100% as possible for the rate of perceived exertion, and the rest needs to be lengthy. It needs to be enough to make you feel like you could do it again at the exact amount of intensity. So this is not the type of workout that we're looking for what we call a diminishing return in. We want to be able to approach each set with the same amount of intensity and effort as the one prior, so a full recovery is required. In some cases, that rest of 90 seconds or 2 minutes, it might not even be long enough. As the workout goes along, as we get close to that 5th or 6th set, we might need somewhere close to 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes of rest, and that would be totally fine. That would be much better, in fact, than taking this shorter amount of rest and then not being as close to 100% of the rate of perceived exertion as you would have otherwise been able to do. So if anything, lengthen the rest to make sure that you can repeat the effort with a maximal intensity. And so now it's time to kind of validate what we're doing. This is the last step in putting our knowledge to work here. And when it comes to considerations for programming, we really need to make sure that we're always coming back to some metric, something we can use to basically confirm that the workouts we've designed for ourselves are actually helping us. And this is no different from you kind of logging your work in the weight room or keeping track of what you're doing through repetitive fitness testing. Don't get too caught up in this. This is not something you need to do every single week or even every single month, but it is a good idea to do it inside of a training cycle a couple of times. So if you've got maybe a 16-week training cycle planned and the goal to, over the course of that 16-week cycle, is to improve speed and power, we want to maybe 3, maximally 4, but maybe 3 times over the course of that 16 weeks. Give ourselves some sort of repetitive, same style every time, but some sort of testing. Whether it's a test we've designed ourselves or whether it's a standard fitness test, we want to make sure that it occurs with schedule and with as much of a similar approach every time as possible. So we want to control the environment as much as possible on those days where we do that testing. So if that means making sure there's a rest day prior to it, or there's not necessarily a very heavy lower body workout, if we're going to be doing some lower body speed and power testing in the 48 hours leading up to it, whatever it is, we want to control that environment so that every single time we test and retest, it's as valid as possible. All right. So depending on the system and the targeted goals, making sure that we're validating the improvement, it means that we're looking at very specific metrics or very specific ways of measuring what we're doing. And the system that we're trying to improve, it needs to align with that metric. Okay, so basically in a nutshell, and again, this is for the most part common sense, but we need to make sure that if we're trying to improve our lower body speed and power, we're not relying on something like a 12-minute run. Just because we ran a little faster and covered more ground over the course of a 12-minute run, chances are that has very little to do with our overall speed and power. Okay, so again, goals. Okay, what's the goal? In this particular case, we'll go back to the basketball player, improve the aerobic capacity, aerobic endurance, the systems at work, oxidative system, slow glycolytic pathway. Training and assessment is going to be distance running and volume-based run workouts. The metrics that we're going to use are volume and time. And the test that we're going to use here could be the 12-minute run. That's an energy budgeting test where the athlete's required to cover as much distance as possible over the course of 12 minutes. And the desired outcome, of course, is demonstrate improvement in efficiency by recording a better result with respect to the distance covered inside of 12 minutes. All right? So our metric, 12 minutes. Volume over time. How many laps in 12 minutes? Okay? A second example, improve anaerobic capacity. So this is totally opposite side of the spectrum. It's not the phosphagen system, not that explosive work, but it's something about that high intensity sustainable effort, somewhere around the 30 to 45 second mark. And this is where we're going to be looking at a different metric. In this case, we want to use a timed running drill or a timed effort, right? It could be something like a watt bike, perhaps, or it could be like a 300-yard shuttle. So I'll give both those examples here, right? But in both cases, we're looking for sustained power output, okay? And so a 300-yard shuttle is great. It's a timed run where an athlete completes 6 50-yard sprints back and forth. So standing on the goal line, running to the center line, back to the goal line. And not only are we going to look at the total time in that 300-yard shuttle, but we kind of want to look at what we call the splits. And learn whether or not that athlete's budgeted well inside of that anaerobic capacity. And we want to split each of those 300-yard shuttles into 3 separate 100-yard efforts. And we want to say, okay, well, you did your first split in 18 seconds, your second split in 20 seconds, and your last split in 22 seconds for a total of 60 seconds. Right, and that's definitely a good anaerobic effort, but we saw there was a diminishing return there as well, and so there's still some improvement that could happen if we're looking to get an athlete closer to like maybe 19, 19, and 19. That would be a 57-second result, and probably something that athlete's already capable of. Okay, a second test could be something like the 60-second average power on the watt bike. If you're familiar with a watt bike, we have a few of them at the school. They're downstairs in our high performance training center. A watt bike test involves an athlete holding a maximum sustainable power effort for continuous 60 seconds. So again, this would be something where we know the test is going to be 60 seconds long, so we're not looking at the time. We're looking at what is the average power output in terms of wattage that the athlete can sustain over the course of 60 seconds. And so, validating that we were becoming more powerful with So validating that we're becoming more powerful with respect to an anaerobic capacity is, in this case, checking whether or not that average wattage is increasing, right, over the course of 60 seconds. And so the desired outcome is different here. So obviously in the shuttle run, it's simple. It's less time to complete the same amount of work. In the watt bike, it's a higher average power output. We've done more work within the same amount of time. But in both cases, because we're working inside of that, somewhere between 45 and 60 seconds with a maximal sustainable effort, we can rest assured that we are targeting that anaerobic capacity as our system. And in truth, there are so many other ways we can basically connect what we're doing to metrics. It's making sure that we're getting the most value out of the metrics that we're using that's most important. And so that's the end of part 4. I almost made it through without having a dry throat there. My apologies at the end. If you have questions, please get in touch. My email address is on the screen, derek.virgo@wiredsb.ca. And you can always connect with me through the website as well, www.strongerbcss.ca. I hope you enjoyed energy systems, and stay tuned. The next modules will be all about proper, helpful, and meaningful recovery. Happy training. Bye for now.